My name is Shu Lin. My parents moved from China to the UK before I was born in search of a better life. I'm really proud of being British-born Chinese. Like many of us, I grew up in restaurants and takeaways, where my parents worked hard to give their children good opportunities. Families like mine have been coming to the UK to build new lives since the end of the Second World War.
When a community settles overseas, its first problem, of course, is to survive. In other words, to make a living.
Our food transformed Britain's bland post-war dining scene, becoming the first foreign cuisine to become widely established here.
Lee shows the right way to use them. You need a light hold, not a judo grip.
This is a story about ingenuity and entrepreneurship.
The work ethic of that generation is just phenomenal, isn't it? The fact that he came from that place of having nothing, you know, and having to literally fight to put food on the table.
It's about winning respect and challenging offensive stereotypes. It's about fighting to belong and building an identity that combines East and West.
Growing up, people would always be like, oh, where'd you come from? And I'd say, oh, I was born in London. And there's always like a slight pause where they then go, no, where do you really come from?
And it's about how a migrant population rooted in catering evolved into today's high-achieving and increasingly confident community. This is my very own take on a very British history.
And who is ready for a new dim sum video in London?
For the past 3 years, I've been working as a professional online vlogger, specialising in food, travel and culture reports from all over the world.
The purpose of this video, as you can tell from the title, is to go through the dim sum do's and the dim sum don'ts.
One way or another, food has always been a big part of my life. I've many childhood memories of moving around different Chinese takeaways on the south coast.
I've probably moved about 15, 16 times at least in my childhood to like early adult years, depending on what takeaway was available for us to move into.
The next station is Lansing.
So here we are in Lansing Station, and right opposite is Jay Garden, which is my first home here. So I moved here when I was 6 years old, and it's not changed. It's still called Jay Garden 20 years later. Growing up in a takeaway was such a weird experience because you were just one Chinese family in a very, very small neighborhood. My parents were working such long hours, like 10 to 15 hours, so they'd get up so early just to prep all of the ingredients and everything for the night. Actually, we never got to eat the Chinese takeaway food because my dad said it wasn't like authentic Cantonese food. So we had a completely different meal times. Like for lunch and dinner, we'd have traditional Cantonese food that wasn't served on the menus. And I remember for, I think it was my 12th birthday, I asked as my birthday present if I could have duck pancakes and like Chinese takeaway food and chicken satay with peanut sauce. And it was such a treat.
My parents emigrated to the UK in the early 1990s from Guangzhou in southern China, before my two younger sisters and I were born.
It is a really scary thought, the sacrifices they made for my sisters and I to essentially have a better life now and a better upbringing. My mum was working in the accounting department of a towel factory and my dad was in sales, so very, very different from catering, and they couldn't really bring those skills over here because they didn't speak English. So then my dad then went into Chinatown and learnt from scratch, just from washing up dishes and things to working his way up to the top.
My dad is now 59 and is still moving around for work.
Hello.
For the last few months, he's been the head chef at a Chinese restaurant in Oxford.
咁點解你嗰陣時中國嚟搬嚟倫敦嗰度嘅？
嗰陣時去匈牙利留學啊嘛，就攞咗 visa 嚟英國啊嘛，咁喺英國嚟咗英國第3日，覺得就唔係嚟到英國第3日就喺唐人街做工，咁做咗一段時間咧，覺得即係英國係喺英國生活比較適合我哋咁樣，試下出世啦，咁你出世之後咧，後就想即係我好中意細路仔嘅，咁但係嗰陣時中國政府就只能夠生一個， 只能夠生一個，所以咧就繼續留喺英國，所以就所以就生咗3個啦，就係咁啦，係。我嚟到英國第3日就去唐人街做工，就做最低層嘅，做我哋叫做打雜，咩辛苦工啊、洗碗啊、搞清潔啊，乜都要做，就都直落，淨係開工時間啊，都11個鐘頭嘅，下午5點半到凌晨4點半鐘，中間冇得休息嘅。初做嗰時，夜晚翻到即係第二朝早翻去起身洗面啊，睇啲扭手巾都扭唔到隻手，
因為攰到咁。
係啊，初唔習慣，啲鑊好重啊嘛。
My family's experiences have much in common with those of many other Chinese people who've emigrated to Britain since the Second World War. I want to find out more about why people came here and how a community established itself.
When a community settles overseas, its first problem, of course, is to survive. In other words, to make a living. Now, how do we Chinese tackle that problem?
In the 1940s, there were only a few thousand Chinese people settled here. Many had previously worked as seamen and went on to open hand laundries, one of the few trades they could easily find employment in.
The easiest way to start independent business with no capital at all is to get a large bucket, buy a large slab of soap, and start to take in other people's washings.
But the UK was about to experience a major influx of new arrivals, caused by violent upheavals in mainland China and the knock-on effect on the British territory of Hong Kong.
Nearly 750,000 terror-stricken Chinese have sought safety under the British flag in Hong Kong, and many are the heart-rending scenes witnessed on the island.
Both mainland China and Hong Kong had suffered dreadfully in the Second World War from Japanese invasion and Japanese aggression. And then when the war ended, of course, China went into civil war. The communists were fighting the Republic of China to take power, and that meant lots of refugees flooded into Hong Kong.
And that flood would continue over the next decade following the takeover of the country by Chairman Mao's communists in 1949.
Hong Kong, Britain's island colony, clinging to the flank of Red China. Here the flow of refugees from the mainland is an indicator of the Chinese people's mood. The influx of nearly 1 million in 10 years at an undiminished rate points to continuing discontent on the mainland for the vast numbers who have fled China's communist new order. Geography and geopolitics have made them the responsibility of this British colony.
Throughout the 1950s, as its population swelled and economic conditions there worsened, many in Hong Kong decided that they would be better off building lives for themselves in Britain, which as residents of a British colony they were able to do. And Britain was in a welcoming mood.
After the Second World War, Britain had a problem. It didn't have enough men and women to fill the jobs, so they were looking to encourage migrants from their colonies around the world to come and work.
Hand laundries, the main trade for British Chinese people, were dying out by the early 1950s as automatic laundrettes started opening on British high streets.
I hope it's going to be an enormous success, and I am now going to declare it open. Hooray!
These would be followed just a few years later by domestic washing machines. But for the new arrivals, opportunities were starting to open up in a different line of work.
Young Alfie, dawdling through the streets of Soho, is puzzled. He's never seen letters like these before. If only he knew what it said. And what's this funny man made of china or something? There's a lovely smell of cooking coming out of the door. Let's go inside and see what's going on.
Servicemen and women who had been fighting in the Far East had got a taste for Chinese food, so Chinese restaurants were beginning to expand. In 1960 there was about 1,000 and 100 opening every year.
Chinese menus detail over 100 different dishes, and if you can't read Chinese, they're printed in English too, with a standard number for each dish wherever you go.
The situation of the Chinese was different from the other immigrant groups, because in 1961 about 1,200 Chinese applied to come from Hong Kong, and 99% of those already had a job in place before they even got here, through their family networks and their village networks. That compared with immigrants coming from Jamaica, from India, where only about 7% had jobs. So while they went off to work in other forms of employment, the whole thrust of Chinese migration tended to be into Chinese restaurants.
Colin Kwok runs one of London's most successful Chinese restaurant chains, The Good Earth. But when he first came over from Hong Kong in the 50s to start work, he had just a few pounds in his pocket.
I first came to UK in 1958. After 2 wars in China, I find real peace in London. Hong Kong was really a bit chaotic because of the immigrants from China. So it was quite difficult times. The very first day I arrived in London, I knew not a single soul, but a friend of mine's brother was here in London, and he picked me up from Tilbury. I came by ship. And then he dropped me in Earl's Court, where he had a single room.
What was your first job when you came into the UK?
Washing up.
Yeah.
I'm still a washing up at home.
I wonder how the new arrivals from Hong Kong were viewed by the British. Were Chinese people seen in a positive light? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, small hubs of Chinese homes and businesses known as Chinatowns had developed around the port areas in Liverpool and London, catering for the many Chinese seamen passing through.
Paddy fields and poplar and Chinatown for me.
In particular, London's Chinatown in Limehouse was often depicted by the British media as a den of vice and villainy. In the popular imagination, it was full of opium dens, brothels and gambling parlours, and ruled over by evil masterminds plotting to enslave white women.
I can't even imagine what it would have been like to come over in the 40s and 50s, having all of this material out there, because I can imagine it being very harrowing and very alienating to come into a community where they already have an image, an expectation of who you are, your culture, your heritage.
But given all the negative and frankly racist portrayals of Chinese people, why did Britain embrace our Cantonese-style cooking so enthusiastically in the post-war years?
What is extraordinary is that you've had rationing in this country from effectively 1939 to 1953. The food has become really monotonous, really tiresome. People are bored of eating the same thing day in and day out. You then have an influx of ingenious, inventive migrants who really need to find a foothold in the country, and they see a kind of gap in the market around food, about people wanting to have a different experience of food. So you've got to remember, in the 1950s, most people would not have eaten out hardly at all, maybe fish and chips every week, but the idea of going out to a restaurant, that was something that was reserved for people who were really wealthy or for a really special treat.
Is he supposed to eat with these things? Well, he can only try. Mustn't let on that he doesn't know the ropes. But when the waiter isn't looking, Alfie knows a better way. After all, fingers were made before chopsticks.
What's really significant about the Chinese restaurants, the first ones, is that they establish an informal and relatively inexpensive place to eat, but one that's nevertheless special. It's a treat. You know, they make sure that there are carpets, there are tablecloths, there are nice knives and forks. The whole place looks special. So you can go there, you know, with your family. You might want to go there on a date. You don't have to be rich, so young people can go there as well. And crucially, they stay open after the pub closes. I think what the first Chinese migrants did that was absolutely amazing was, in a sense, they democratized eating out. They made it available to everybody.
Very, very good. Excellent value for money.
The service is extremely good and I enjoy the food.
Well, I think the businessman's lunch is very good value for money.
So I've actually got a menu that was dated back to approximately 1958, which kind of had an example of the dishes that were available then.
You can really see this kind of hybrid food culture where you have completely recognisably British dishes, ham and chips, omelette and chips. You know, that is not going to frighten the horses, is it? Nobody who's cautious about food is going to be frightened by that. But then you've still got chow mein, chop suey, sweet and sour pork, these kind of ersatz kind of Chinglish dishes. There are accounts of people first seeing, sweet and sour pork written on a menu and bursting out laughing and just saying, how can something be sweet and sour?
Really?
Of course, it is sweet and sour. I mean, now we know, of course you can have sweet and sour, but people thinking that's ridiculous.
Don't use a fork. Use chopsticks. It's easy. Or so they told these other holiday makers at a Clacton holiday camp.
More of the British public got to sample so-called Chinglish food at the end of the 50s when Billy Butlin started opening Chinese restaurants at his holiday camps. There were even competitions to get campers used to handling chopsticks.
Now look at that lady's stroke play. Yes, it does taste good. He wouldn't know, of course. He hasn't started yet. Hey, what's this? He's really mixing it now. Madam, please.
In a relatively short period of time, Chinese food is really a kind of established way of eating. And in 1965, there's a catering survey done, and that catering survey tells us that for people who ate out, either regularly or occasionally, 31% of them had eaten in a Chinese restaurant, as compared to only 5% at Italian or 8% at Indian. So Chinese food, it's the first foreign food to get established in this kind of mass way in this country.
Billy Butlin wasn't the only person spreading the word about the new cuisine. Kenneth Lowe wrote the first of his many English-language Chinese cookery books in the mid-50s, which over the next 3 decades would expand the British public's appreciation of the vast range of authentic Chinese regional cooking, often very different from the Chinglish version of Cantonese food they might be familiar with.
Western people often wonder why we Chinese use chopsticks instead of the usual knife and fork. Well, the answer dates back to Confucius, as so many things in China dates back to Confucius. He once said that a man of virtue will never live or go anywhere near to the kitchen or the slaughterhouse, because he doesn't want to hear the killing of animals or to see the meat being carved and sliced up. And that's why in China, the slicing and carving of meat has never been allowed onto the dining table.
Kenneth's daughter Vivian remembers how challenging it was in the 50s and 60s for her father to recreate Chinese flavours from what was available on British supermarket shelves.
Of course, there were no ingredients at that time. It wasn't so easy to even get soy sauce in those years. It wasn't in Tesco's and it wasn't in the ordinary supermarkets. So he spent a long time trying to recreate different sauces through local ingredients. So HP sauce, I think, was a key ingredient. Peanut butter. I mean, we want sesame, but peanuts are okay.
Up until the mid-60s, the vast majority of Chinese migrants in the UK were single men, and mixed marriages were common. Vivian's mother was English.
When we first came here, apart from being short of capital, we were also chronically short of women. The result was that many of us domiciles here have married English girls. And many people wonder how these mixed marriages have come out. Well, from the facts and figures seem to show that they've been quite successful. Well, I ought to know something about that because I married an English girl myself.
By the 1960s, Kenneth Lowe had become an established figure in the UK through regular radio broadcasts and television appearances.
Dad was pretty much a chain smoker. And so he would be cooking on the wok with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And he would never tap the ash, so I'd be sitting there watching this ash just curling over, about to drop in the wok. And I'm thinking, Dad, you can't do that. He just seemed to be a rather shambolic chef to me as well. And that's because he wasn't a great chef. He was an appreciator of chefs. He was somebody who loved the world of cookery and delivered its finer messages to the British public.
As the standard and variety of Chinese food improved during the swinging 60s, some of our glitzier restaurants started to become seriously fashionable, attracting rock royalty like the Beatles and genuine royalty like Princess Margaret. But even as the British were embracing Chinese food in the late 60s, political tensions between the two countries were running high. Chairman Mao's oppressive Cultural Revolution was in full swing, cracking down hard on capitalist sympathisers, and questions were being asked about the loyalties of British Chinese people.
Would the present circumstances between China and Britain stop you from eating in a Chinese restaurant?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't think that the Chinese in England are the same Chinese that come from China.
I would have thought that the majority of proprietors of Chinese restaurants would probably not be citizens of the Communist Republic of China.
The majority of the Chinese that come to this country are mainly from Hong Kong or Cantonese, and providing they still give the excellent facilities they do at the moment, I shouldn't think their political views come into their catering business anyway.
The Hong Kong Chinese community in Britain are loyal to Hong Kong. Their ultimate aim is to return to Hong Kong on retirement. And secondly, Chinese people are very practical. They do not, generally speaking, indulge in politics. Indeed, as far as the restaurant trade is concerned, they have little time to do so.
It seems to me that by avoiding political controversies, Chinese migrants were able to concentrate on building their communities. And as a single man married British women or were joined by wives from Hong Kong, family life became more important and a new hub was needed for the growing community. London's old dockside Chinatown and Limehouse had been devastated in the Blitz, but from the late 60s, a new Chinatown developed in the cheap red light district of Soho. To this day, Chinatown is a magnet for Chinese people like me scattered across the UK.
Chinatown was such a special place growing up because we didn't get to come here very often. It was a place for us to come and have dim sum. We got to try all the different food that we didn't get back at home. And we got to see people that looked more like me, even in like the local shops, so we could hear like Chinese music and Chinese CDs and newspapers, magazines, because we didn't really get to buy that back at home. So it's a good way of like reconnecting with a different side of the culture.
Fei Liu has owned several restaurants in Chinatown over the years and has vivid memories of growing up here in the 1970s.
In the early days in Chinatown, right, we all knew each other, right? I would know the next door restaurant or something. It was like a neighborhood because everyone came from Hong Kong, so we knew that you're either a Man or you're a Liu or you're a Chang. It was a small knitted community. This was where my dad's minicab office was.
Oh, yeah.
In them days, there were a lot of nightclubs, like the Empire Discotheque. So there weren't casinos, were nightclubs. So all the people used to wear the Bombay flares, the wing collars, and they used to come about from about 9 o'clock to 4 in the morning. We used to be busy. They used to come here, and then we didn't have any radios, and hire a taxi to go home.
Yeah.
But then my dad had a bit of gambling instinct, so he opened a mahjong club as well.
Oh.
So it wasn't just minicabbing, it was a mahjong club.
Mahjong has been popular in China for hundreds of years and is usually a four-player game with similar rules to the Western card game Rummy. But as Fei's friend Wing remembers, the Mahjong clubs were a far cry from the feist-dens of Limehouse legend.
In those days, there was a few gambling dens in Gerrard Street, you know, but it was not as bad as you think those gambling dens. It's actually a family gathering place, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, we would say, where are you going to meet? Oh, in so-and-so gambling den, you know.
Okay.
And the family children, I used to go down there with my mom, and we do have a cup of tea there.
There were good business opportunities to be had, but new arrivals often had to work their way up from the bottom. Stanley Che started his career in the kitchen.
I went on the train from Paddington, take a train to go up to Shrewsbury. Lovely place, Shropshire, beautiful place. Yeah, this is my uncle's restaurant. My brother say, you go to work in the kitchen. Why? Because you're too handsome. I don't know what you get any girls. So he sent me down to the kitchen. I do a lot of washing up, you know. Oh, really unbelievable in those days. You go cut the potatoes and those chicken in those days, not like now. So come here, put the hand, cut the hands off, cut the hair off, cut the legs off, cut the legs off, cut everything off, you know. And then you unplug inside, called smelly. I've been doing it for almost 2 years, you know.
at that time the community was clamouring for authentic Chinese ingredients. Stanley spotted a business opportunity, and in 1975 he opened the Siwu supermarket. It soon became a Chinatown institution and has since grown into a multi-million-pound business.
Does Siwu supply to a lot of the restaurants here in Chinatown?
I must say, yeah, 8 out of 10. Yeah, 80%.
The managing director of the Siwu Group is now Stanley's daughter Lucy, who grew up above the store in Chinatown.
We were, in fact, the first importers of pak choi in the UK. People would be queuing around the aisles because of some of the ingredients we've got here in store that they just can't get from anywhere else.
So what are your favourite childhood memories in Chinatown?
Oh, so standing up in the kitchen, as it was then, which was just up there, and a Chinese New Year, and of course you get a bird's eye view, so when the line's jumping up, you see them like literally front on, so I remember that really well.
Chinese New Year is the biggest date in the calendar for our community and is celebrated in Chinatowns around the country. A symbolic creature makes its way through the neighbourhood, chasing away evil spirits in return for gifts.
The Chinese New Year starts with a bang. A lucky unicorn dances round the streets of Birmingham, visiting Chinese businesses, distributing good luck for the coming 12 months.
But even as Soho's Chinatown and its traditions were being established, prejudice and abuse from visitors was sadly all too frequent.
There's a lot of racism then, yeah, if you don't mind me saying, and a lot of people used to say, you ching chong, wong wong, and this and that. And I remember few incidents, like I explained to you before that we know everyone here. Yeah. Someone called someone's name, the waiter come out from this restaurant, and the waiter used to come out from this restaurant, and they used to fight with English.
The only way we can deal with them is, I'm afraid, sometimes, we have to, use violence, You either pay up or you don't leave this restaurant, That's what my father's generation used to do. I'm afraid in the 70s, in the early 80s, it still does.
In this period, putting up with racist abuse was something most British Chinese families became painfully familiar with. The actor and director David Say grew up in a takeaway in Herefordshire.
Every Friday, Saturday night, white customers would come in drunk and be very racially abusive. And it was traumatizing. For black people, the N-word is unacceptable. For South Asians, the P-word is unacceptable. And for Chinese people, you do not use the C word. It's not a shorthand for a Chinese takeaway. It's an offensive word that's been used to really hurt a lot of young British-born Chinese.
I could really relate to what David was telling me, because although prejudices have faded over time, they've never disappeared entirely.
I think growing up in takeaways and restaurants, there was a lot of mimicking with obviously their accent, and at school people would pass by and kind of make comments to me about the way I looked or kind of mimicked what Chinese would sound like. But I think I just kind of learned to shrug it off after a while and just kind of thought that just kind of comes with the territory of being Chinese in a small local town.
David's story also reminded me that xenophobic stereotypes of Chinese people were deeply ingrained in the popular culture of the 70s and 80s.
Orange.
Orange.
That's better.
You really must work at those R sounds. I try very hard. Try saying, "Round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran." Round the rugged lock, the ragged...
That must feel really uncomfortable because they're clearly mocking somebody for not being able to pronounce a certain word and certain letter as well. Yeah, and it makes me really horrible to think, because I can imagine something like this happening to my parents then, of people kind of making fun of them not being able to pronounce certain words properly. And it's worse because you've got the laughter in the background.
Is that your national costume?
This is uniform of People's Army of Liberation as prescribed by Chairman Mao. You not like it?
Well, I think it lacks a certain finish, a belt of ammunition, a couple of hand grenades.
I think it's really disturbing to think that that was the everyday norm back in the day, and a lot of people would consume this type of media, and their main takeaway, excuse the pun, would be that this is how you would treat other people who don't look like you.
What's this dish called?
In English, it's called politician's pudding.
Why politician's pudding?
Because into it, we put pea stalks. Pea stalks. That's a Chinese joke. Why there no crapping? Why there no crapping out there?
Racist attitudes weren't the only social problem the community had to contend with. As Chinatown grew and prospered, there were often large amounts of cash circulating, making it a prime target for criminal gangs.
In the old days, right, all gambling joints is all cash.
Yeah.
So, for example, like Christmas, people used to bring suitcases from Scotland, saving all their year's wage.
Just full of cash?
Yeah, full of cash.
Really?
Saving all of their money. They've made the whole year in Scotland, come down Chinatown to gamble. It's not just like briefcases of cash.
Actual suitcases of
yeah.
cash?
In them days, weren't £50 notes, they were £20 notes.
Wow.
In 1982, a gang tried to extort some money from Faye's father's gambling joint with fatal results.
My father paid them £500, and after when they came back to collect the money, they were scared because we had security then. So they put a chain around the door and threw 2 fire bombs, petrol bombs, and there were 7 people inside there, and they were burned alive. The entrance was blocked.
Oh, that's awful.
They thought my mum and dad would have been killed that night, but they left early.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 7 people got burnt.
Oh, that's awful.
Bit of history.
Yeah, yeah.
This terrible incident wasn't widely reported at the time, perhaps reflecting the way the Chinese community was still marginalised by wider British society. To promote stronger integration and to help preserve Chinese culture, the London Chinese Community Centre was founded in 1980, the first of its kind in the UK. Its chair is Christine Yao.
It was set up to help the community members who do not understand English.
Mm-hmm.
They very often have letters, from the authority, from the council, from school, or establishments like that. They could not understand it. And in the first year, 1,000 people came through the door. So that explained why it was very important.
Yeah.
And now we have a weekly visit of, I think, about 600 people every week.
Single week?
Every single week.
As well as language and legal advice, the centre also assists with social problems.
Certain things are taboo in the Chinese community. Domestic violence. They don't want to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, I understand like mental health issues.
Yes, mental health
things
is
like divorce
yes.
are like taboo subjects in Chinese communities as well.
If they come to us, we just try to explain to them this is nothing very peculiar. It happens all the time.
The centre serves regular lunches for older visitors, many of whom come in for a chat and a chance to participate in Chinese cultural activities.
They come here and then have the lunch here. We can talk together, and then after finish, take the time, after break, and then we can have another exercise.
There are all sorts of classes on offer here, from Chinese dancing and opera singing to calligraphy and painting.
1, 2, okay, think. Up all the way. I just attempted a traditional folk dance, but as you can tell, it was a lot more difficult than it looks, and the moves are also intricate and delicate and beautiful, but I had a bit of a hard time trying to learn the exact moves.
Mahjong remains hugely popular.
I got one guy, my friend, 92 years old, play mahjong, sharp as a needle. His eyesight, very good. The way he does his mahjong, very fast. He put up the bricks, very fast. When you play mahjong, you don't have illnesses, you don't have pain, because your whole mind concentration is on the mahjong.
because we didn't have this growing up. I didn't learn things from TV or from what our parents said, so to have somewhere like this, it would really have helped my sisters and I to feel more connected to, you know, our heritage and background.
I think it's very important to make sure our culture and heritage will be maintained from generation to generation.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, Soho's Chinatown consolidated its place at the heart of the UK's Chinese community, acquiring its impressive gates and its pedestrian zones. These were boom times for Cantonese food. Mainstream supermarkets started stocking Chinese ingredients and developing their own brands. Recipes and adverts were everywhere.
Skillfully blended to traditional Chinese recipe to help you make mouth-watering Cantonese sweet and sour chicken. Okay, Fred?
No, I'm Bert.
Oh, so sorry. All home-plied men look same to me. Ha ha.
On electricity or gas,
TV chef Ken Hom picked up where Kenneth Lo had left off, demonstrating the best ways to cook Chinese food and sending wok sales soaring.
now you can confidently cook Chinese food at home, so let's walk together.
Having transformed the British restaurant culture, Chinese chefs were about to radically change the style of TV cooking programs too.
Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be introducing to you many of the cooking techniques used in China. These are some of the dishes that I'll be showing you how to make during the series.
I had a chance to meet the man himself, still going strong at 70.
So what are your fondest memories of your first television programs and cooking shows?
Well, you know, it was really funny when I was making the program for BBC.
Yeah.
They were so worried that I would set fire to the studio.
Oh, really?
There was 3 firemen on the set.
What, just in case? It's on standby.
And for instance, if I say, get the wok hot, and then at the just don't say that, you know, because it was a time of chip pan fires.
And when you're stir frying like this, you must constantly move the food so that the food doesn't rest in one place too long. Then you run the risk of it burning.
What was really interesting, it changed cookery programs.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, it was not something where I'll show you how to make it, and here's one I made earlier.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, one of the biggest problems was that the producer and director would say, you've got to slow down, Ken, because you'll be finished. This is a 28-minute program, and you're done in like less than 8 minutes.
Yeah, especially with how quickly the food
exactly.
is. Yeah.
And so for the first time, people saw food actually being cooked in real time.
Yeah.
And it just captured the attention and of the whole country.
In the mid-80s, the cuisine was firmly established and catering was still the main source of employment. Only 2% of British Chinese people worked in professional white-collar jobs. But for many children of Chinese migrants, the prospect of spending their lives working in catering was not very appetizing.
The present idea of the Chinese previously was chip shops, laundries, and restaurants. You know, they seem to graduate. They start off in laundries, graduate to a chippy, and then finally to a restaurant, and at full stop. That's the basic idea. In a lot of people's eyes, even amongst the Chinese themselves, well, we're trying to break out of that. Everyone here wants to evolve from that, change from that. I lived in a chippy. You live in a chippy. Mm-hmm. But I know a number who are, even though they live in the chippies, are still moving forward. You know, getting good grades, hoping to do something with their lives rather than follow their parents into the chippy.
Being confined to a Chinese takeaway for the rest of your life seems like hell on earth. And Chinese families, regardless of class, have been very focused on education. Chinese families look after themselves, the community to some extent, but it's a very family-oriented society. So they're really looking to the education of their children, and that's going to show in terms of the aspirations of the next generation.
The views my own parents held about the importance of education seem to be typical of those of many first-generation Chinese immigrants.
They always drummed into us, you know, the value of money and how hard you have to work for your money, which was why they were so strict on us for our education, because they'd always say, we don't want you to end up doing this. We don't want you to work in a Chinese takeaway all these long hours, so you have to work very hard at school to kind of make all of these long hours and the sacrifices worth it. instead of having like playtime, we would have toys and things, and my mum would bring us like Carol Vorderman books, where she used to like maths books and English books, and she'd make us fill it out in pencil, then rub it out, and then be like, surprise, you can fill it out again after school. And that was like, yay, after school like fun activity, which wasn't actually that fun. But she'd entice us with like food and gold stars, so we did it in the end.
Hannah has been my best friend since my primary school days in Lansing. She remembers just how strict my family were with our education.
We had a big group of friends, and if we wanted to do something on a Sunday, Shu had Chinese school, so she couldn't go. Things like sleepovers were a lot stricter with you. I know that homework and doing extra work was a lot stricter in your household than mine.
Hannah has vivid memories of me waitressing as a teenager in the Lansing restaurant my parents took over after a few years of running the takeaway.
I could never go out weekends because I'd be working at the restaurant.
Me and my family used to go and visit all the time. My parents absolutely loved it in there. And
I was the waitress?
Yeah, you were the waitress. And I remember you were like the first person I knew to have a job as well, because you started waitressing quite young. Because it was a family business, and I think you got a lot of tips as well.
So, yeah. I learned a lot, especially like Christmas, when people are a bit tipsy, and you're 13-year-old, and I'm like, oh my God, this gave me £5.
Yeah. I'm even quite jealous because you always had like disposable income at that age, and it would just be like, I want to add my paper round, which didn't pay a lot.
From the 90s onwards, British Chinese people have become an incredible success story for this country's education system. So much so that today, British Chinese youngsters are the highest performing ethnic group in England at GCSE and are more likely to attend university than any other group. Within the space of a single generation, we've gone from just 2% of us working in white-collar professions to nearly 25%. But despite the success, the economics of the catering trade left many of us scattered and isolated. And that's why the arrival of the internet at the turn of the millennium was such a big moment for us, bringing people together to talk about shared issues. Hello and welcome to the third mukbang musing today. We have... Online communities and social media have certainly been important for connecting me with other British Chinese people and for my work as a professional vlogger.
Growing up, my parents always wanted me to go into like business or accounting or maybe a lawyer or a doctor. I didn't fall into any of those things, even though they still desperately want me to change my plans to go into banking or finance. But I think at the start, they weren't very understanding about me wanting to go into the creative field. But I think as time went on, they are now so much more supportive, especially because I've kind of made it into more of a business myself.
Through my vlogs, I'm often contacted by young British Chinese people who are keen to discuss issues of identity and belonging. Sarah Ye was one of the pioneers who kickstarted these kinds of online discussions within the wider Chinese community. She was a co-founder of the Dim Sum website, which ran from 1999 to 2011.
I was with a bunch of friends and we were talking about the lack of resources for the British Chinese community. We decided on building a website and we could target the geographically dispersed audience in that way. Originally it was stuff to do with identity and family and the sort of culture clashes that you get with your core family and what their expectations are of you and British society at large. Issues of identity, how we perceived ourselves to be. Did we feel Chinese enough, or did we feel sold out? Those sort of issues, as well as issues perhaps to do with racism within the workplace. And I really felt that Dim Sum was able to help the Chinese community as far as it could.
Where foot and mouth has been, everything has changed. This countryside is absolutely silent. There are no animals and no people, but there is a constant stench of smoke.
In 2001, the Dim Sum website played a key role in bringing the wider British Chinese community together to fight a political battle when Chinese restaurants were wrongly blamed for a major outbreak of foot and mouth disease.
What's most concerning people here is the fact that it's hitting them hard in their pockets. Some restaurateurs I've been talking to have said since there were reports that Chinese restaurants might have been handling infected meat, demand here, the number of people coming to eat in these restaurants is down 40%.
They experienced a real downturn in people going to the restaurants and the takeaways, as well as an increase in racist attacks. So that was a really difficult time for us as a community. We were able to create the first national campaign against this, first national protest, and there were several thousand people that turned up to our protest English as well as Chinese. We walked down to MAF headquarters and we got a government apology and a media turnaround immediately.
Dim Sum was involved in other important campaigns that raised awareness of the desperate and sometimes fatal conditions faced by illegal Chinese migrants, like the 58 people found dead in the back of a lorry in Dover in 2000 and the 23 cockle pickers who drowned in Morecambe Bay in 2004.
Dim Sum really helped people, or tried to encourage people to defend their rights and defend their position within the community. And I think there's still a need for that, whether you go into politics and Parliament to do that, or whether you do it at a grassroots level.
Our relative lack of visibility in public life remains a big issue for the UK's Chinese community. But there are a growing number of us who are trying to change that and give British Chinese people a bigger national profile.
Hello, sorry to disturb you. Hiya, my name's James and I just wanted to introduce myself as your, hopefully, future MP.
In recent years, there have been signs of change. More Chinese people are getting involved in politics. People like James Chan from Merseyside, who stood in the 2015 general election.
A month ago, a mature wood with ponds and wildlife, foxes, birds, bats, it was all destroyed and it was all done really suddenly. The residents here are really angry about it, they're really upset. I want to give you my contact details so we can help raise this issue. Whether I win the election or not, it's something...
Well, we've still got to keep doing something about it.
Exactly, because someone has to answer for that. I first thought about the idea of going into politics sometime when I was a university student. The things I was involved in, the things that I was interested in terms of environmental justice and social justice and global health, they were all issues that I've cared passionately about. And as I learned more, I realised that actually politics is a way to influence it in a real way.
Ultimately, James was defeated in the 2015 election, but I think that his willingness to put himself forward is an encouraging sign that British Chinese people are becoming more willing to speak up for their political beliefs.
I want to see success for Britain and for the world, and I think for that to happen, you need to have a diversity of voices. Because of my Chinese background, because I'm medical, I offer a unique perspective, perhaps.
I feel it's really important for British Chinese to participate, to voice out. And I think it's through politics and through the arts that we will finally be more visible in the UK.
In the early 80s, David Yip starred in The Chinese Detective, becoming the first Chinese lead actor in a British television drama series. But nearly 40 years on, actor David Say believes that there's still plenty of progress to be made in Chinese representation in British art and culture. He has direct experience of how Chinese people are routinely stereotyped.
When white people write stories about us, so often they want us to play criminals. And it just creates this really very racist and ridiculous and wrong impression of us. As a young adult, when I used to go clubbing, people would just come up to me and say, "Do you have drugs?" I mean, just because of this racist assumption that Chinese people are criminal.
David was the founder artistic director of Yellow Earth Theatre, which was set up in 1995 to give a greater platform to British East Asian actors, as well as directors, writers and designers.
Yellow Earth Theatre was necessary so that, thank goodness, you know, the 3 years of drama school training weren't wasted. You know, you don't end up just playing martial artists or waiters or, you know, triads and criminals, you know, for the women, prostitutes and, you know, all these very negative things that white writers, directors, producers and so on feel that are acceptable to portray us. They're not acceptable. Our contribution to the history of the UK is as valid and vital as anybody else. We're here. We've been here for a very long time. The first recorded Chinese visitor was during the court of James II. So don't tell me any period drama on the BBC or anywhere that you can't include people of Chinese descent. Because historically we've been around, but our history has been kind of erased. And if you look at BBC EastEnders or The Archers on Radio 4, British Chinese have still been rendered invisible. I think it's time for that to change. It really is, because otherwise we're forever being treated as other, as if we don't belong.
We may still be fighting for better recognition across British art and culture, but our cuisine is now better appreciated than ever.
Hello, everyone!
The days of Chinglish menus are far behind us, and the vast range and sophistication of Chinese food is now justly celebrated. The Golden Chopsticks Awards were set up to honour the best of the UK's Chinese and East Asian cooking.
We moved on to the Golden Chopsticks Best Takeaway Award. I know.
Times have moved on as our community has thrived, and now we're in a position where we can show the world, you know, the kind of the food that represents us. And there's so many different regional cuisines. I mean, when I first came to the UK, you know, in the 90s, Shaoxing rice wine wasn't available. We were lucky if we had coriander, you know, if we found coriander in the supermarket.
How far do you think Chinese food has progressed since the kind of cheap and cheerful days in the 50s and 60s to the present day?
What you've seen in the last sort of 10 or 15 years is a real opening out of China in the British restaurant scene. So there's been a lot of foreign students coming, chefs from different regions. And so now, you know, the Cantonese have lost their stranglehold on the restaurant industry, and we've got Sichuanese, Hunan food, Dongbei, all kinds of exciting developments, a couple of Shanghainese supper clubs. And I think also with the rise of China on everyone's minds on the world economy, it's just that, you know, the status of China has grown and people are more aware of it, and they can see that it's going to be more powerful in the future. And I think that's also had an impact on the way that Chinese food is viewed. You know, it's not low status, cheap food anymore.
China's rising status and the relaxing of its immigration laws has meant that most recent Chinese migrants to the UK, particularly students, have been from the mainland rather than Hong Kong. And that's been changing the face and character of Soho's Chinatown.
I think the future in Chinatown is not going to be Cantonese. It's going to be mainland China people who are coming in money from China who are investing. But Cantonese are out. I mean, we've been here since the 1960s. I'm in my second generation. My sons are all westernized. They've gone to university. They're going to do a 9-to-5 job. They're not going to go in catering.
In recent years, many of the older Cantonese restaurants in Chinatown have been hit with steep hikes in their rents and rates.
I mean, if you walk past now and 20 years ago, you will notice a lot of changes. In terms of old restaurant, most of the big restaurants is actually gone now, and this is unfortunately will be the future. I mean, it might not be a Chinatown anymore. It will be something else.
And do you think it'll be more of like a Pan-Asian?
I think it will be a Pan-Asian type of town now, and although the Chinese actually put in a lot of time and effort building up the image and icon and building these gates and making this to be one of the best Chinatown worldwide, and it's a shame that eventually we will be victim of our success because the landlord wanted more and the business rate city council wanted more as well.
But, as in the past with laundries and catering, more recent Chinese immigrants have proved adept at finding profitable business opportunities.
When there was a large influx of people coming from mainland China, then there had to be a new service, and that service really morphed into Chinese medical shops. What we don't have as a nation is the ability to get the quick fix. Either your shirt's got to be laundered, your stomach has got to be full, fast, or your back has got to be fixed. You know, to get physiotherapy, you have to wait a long time in waiting rooms, and physiotherapy may be great, but it doesn't have the immediacy of Chinese massage. It's a bit painful, but you walk out feeling better.
We may have been successful at providing services and earning money, but for me and many other British Chinese people, working out where we truly belong is a journey of a lifetime.
In 61 years, I've become more like an Englishman than a Chinaman. But of course, I'm Chinese. My blood is there. I can't change it. I spent these days 4 months away from this country. in Hong Kong, but I still feel homesick.
When I was growing up in Lansing, Hannah was always aware of the conflicts of identity I was experiencing.
When you were younger, you would do a lot more to try and be more Western, and even though you had a really, like Chinese culture was a big part of your upbringing, you muted it a bit more, I think, and you wanted to do more Western things, maybe in that rebellion sense that you always kind of want to do what your parents don't want you to do. But as you've grown up, you've really embraced it.
I think back then, like, when I was younger, I was so ashamed to be Chinese, and also it was like I got so much from other people being like, you don't look Chinese, you're not this, you're not that, and I just grew up just being like, I hate being Chinese. And then being a lot more confident when I was older about embracing that and being more confident.
And it's nice to see you're proud of it now, and it's part of you, it's not something you're trying to hide.
Yeah.
I didn't get to visit China until I was a teenager, but nowadays I try and go to Hong Kong at least twice a year.
The reason I'm here today is to try a traditional Chinese dress called a K-pole. It's a traditional Chinese body-hugging dress that originated in the 20s in Shanghai.
It feels really good to connect more strongly with the Chinese side of my heritage, and I think a lot of other British Chinese people go through a similar process of finding over time that they can be proud of both parts of their identity. Today, there are over 430,000 Chinese people living in the UK. Since starting as a small Chinatown community event a generation ago, London's Chinese New Year celebrations have become the largest of their kind outside Asia, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors.
It's amazing here at Chinese New Year. You just can't get down the street. You know, it's just absolutely rammed. But that's really lovely too, because you can now see as well, you get so many Westerners coming up. You know, Chinese New Year is the first proper festival in the UK calendar, which is so exciting.
Another highlight of the calendar for British Chinese people is the annual dragon boat race held in London's Docklands. Particularly for those with roots in Hong Kong, it's a great way of celebrating that cultural fusion of East and West.
Dragon boat racing actually can be dated back to Chinese folklore 2,000 years ago. Back in 1970s, Hong Kong started organizing this international dragon boat festival every year. So it's sort of like mixing this Chinese culture with a sports, international sport. It's full of energy and full of colors, and you see the noise and also the drums and all the excitement.
Making this film, it's been a real privilege to meet so many people who have played a part in building and connecting the Chinese community in Britain, and who've overcome poverty and discrimination to establish themselves and their families here. It's really gratifying to see the ways our food has been embraced in Britain. But it's also great to see how for many of us, catering has been a means to an end, giving us opportunities to branch out and take on so many other roles in modern Britain.
Half of us are police officers, police staff, all police officers, most of us.
Is this your first time racing?
Fourth time. Getting 16 people plus a drummer in one place, it is very challenging. It's a great way to unite people together and also really promote awareness of Chinese culture within our organisation, as well as also basically being present in such a huge community event.
I really want to do it now, so maybe
you should do it.
To get involved.
You should do it. That will get you fit, that will get it out there and get you connected with your community. So it's great. Plus you get some Chinese food as well.
Baby, I'm